I'm ready.
All
I'm
right.
ready.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to our session tonight. My name is Kim Hewitt, and thank you for taking time out of your busy week to join us tonight. I'm the president of the School Media and Technology Division at AECT, the Association of Educational Communications and Technology. We're an organization dedicated to supporting educational technology research and practice, and our division in particular is interested in issues related to technology use in school settings with library media specialists, instructional technologists, teachers, that kind of thing. And if you like tonight's webinar, we invite you to join us for other webinars later this year and next year. You can check our, we have a link on our intro slide here that I'll mention a couple times tonight. The SMT, actually it's going to be on the next slide. It's the tiny URL. You probably accessed it to register tonight, but it will have information if you want to follow our division and tune into later webinars this year. So again, thank you all for coming. We're really excited to have you. So tonight we're excited to feature a years-long project to support strong school libraries in Georgia. And without further ado, I would like to actually introduce our presenters, starting with Dr. Phyllis Snipes. She's a professor of school library media at the University of West Georgia, where I also work with her. She was recently recognized for her teaching of school library graduate students with the Regents Teaching Excellence Award for online teaching at our university. She's been a school librarian at all instructional levels, elementary, middle, and high. And in recent years, she has led the formation of the Georgia School Library Media Consortium to address issues that school librarians in Georgia face. So we'll get to hear a lot about some of that tonight. Our next presenter, our other presenter, is Holly Frilot. So Phyllis is at the higher education level, kind of working with school library advocacy. Holly is actually working in a school district in a leadership position. She's the supervisor for Cobb County K-12 library media education. So she supervises a school library in Cobb County. I think it may be one of our biggest school districts in Georgia. It's an enormous school district. She supports library media specialists and their programs in 114 schools in her district. Holly believes that library media programs are vibrant centers of literacy, technology, creativity, and innovation. As a former Library Media Specialist of the Year, she draws upon her experiences to create library media programs that develop future-ready students. Quickly, I just want to talk logistics for just a second, how we're going to run this session. We've prepared our questions in advance to kind of allow Phyllis and Holly to tell us the story of their work about using this instrument called the SLEI is what they kind of call it. It's the SLEI instrument, and it helps guide effective school librarian practice. So we're going to hear the story about this instrument tonight. Phyllis and Holly are going to walk us through those questions, and then once finished, we're going to take your questions. We're going to try to leave at least 10 minutes. There could be more time than that, so feel free to put your comments in the chat. Our past president of the School Media and Technology Division, Dr. Dennis Beck, over in Arkansas, he's going to be monitoring the chat. He's going to be helping me with that, so I thank him for that. And please remain muted during the presentation so we can hear our presenters. And of course, visit Tiny. Here's the link I mentioned that's going to it has resources that are going to be mentioned tonight. Please visit it to access references and follow-ups. So let's go ahead and get started. At this time, we're going to let Phyllis and Holly take it away. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Kim, this is Holly. Thank you, Kim, for that wonderful intro. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis. Phyllis, are you going to kick us off this evening?
I will indeed. I will be happy to share some thoughts with you as we move into this extremely important topic, I think, for the school library media profession. First of all, in Georgia, we call ourselves school library media specialists. I know there are teacher librarians, there are school librarians. Those terms are interchangeable. So I'll probably mention those, mix those up as I talk through some thoughts about these questions tonight. The first couple of questions I think I'll take together. What does a strong school library program look like? And what effect does a strong school library program have on students and the school community it serves? Well, first of all, I think a strong program is a program that has the students at its heart. I tell all of my students in my classes to advocate, advocate, advocate. And the best way to do that is through student successes. Now, we've got some important studies out there, the Lance studies, and most recently in South Carolina, Karen Gavigan, 22 states that report strong library programs impact student achievement. And these studies show the need for staffing and funding and accessibility and ample resources in order to have a quality library media program. Now, as school librarians or district library supervisors tonight in attendance, you all know that administering a strong program, it requires high collaboration with stakeholders and management of budgets, implementation and instruction on new technologies, and design and development of learning spaces like the maker spaces and the learning commons approach that we're seeing go across the country, and a lot of other duties that combine to result in student academic achievement. But I think a truly strong library program goes much deeper than student achievement even. It's not just academic success that strong programs offer. They offer more intangible kinds of things like confidence in kids and curiosity and imagination, successes that in many ways just are not measurable. If you take a look at our Future Ready flyer, it shows for Future Ready librarians, it shows personalized student learning at the center of that flyer. And that's rightly so. A strong program prepares students for the future, and it serves as a safe and nurturing place for the entire community around it. So not only students, but outside patrons, parents, community members recognize that the School Library Media Center is a place that everybody appreciates. And that kind of defines for me what I think a strong library media program is. And what do we lose if we don't have one? Well, there's potential to lose a lot. When a strong program doesn't exist, the community stands a chance of losing the professional support of the librarian or even the library itself. I know in Georgia, we see a threat in some instances where programs are crippled because of the loss of professional staff. And those students and teachers lose the benefit of a highly trained professional who can develop those programs that make a huge difference in their learning and even their lives. So that's the problem, a part of the problem that we saw a couple of years ago as we started talking about what are the things we can do to impact the world of library media services. So we determined that there's a missing piece. And the missing piece, I would contend, is voice. There was a huge need for advocacy, especially at a time when technology is just so fluid, and teachers desperately need the partnership of a trained librarian. So in order for those in power, like the administrators, the principals, the superintendents, in order for them to make the wisest decisions for the school, they need to hear what a powerful difference a strong library media program can make. Oftentimes they don't know the vast array of skills that professional library media specialists have and what they can offer to the entire school community. And there was no current method for educating administrators and teachers and even legislators about library media services. Everything was just pretty haphazard a couple of years ago. Evaluations were conducted using a variety of instruments. The main one that we used most recently dates back to 1991. And with no collective voice from library personnel, the evolution of the former librarian role to the more vibrant, essential, future-ready librarian role just hasn't been recognized. So that was the missing piece that we felt like we needed to come together and address a couple of years ago. This gives you a kind of an overview of the school library leadership in the state of Georgia. Leadership and advocacy have several different points of input, so to speak. There's the school library preparation programs, school district, school library leaders, whether practicing media specialists or district leaders. We have the Georgia Library Media Association, which is the AASL affiliate in Georgia. We have Association for IT, Georgia DOE, and all of these had input into leadership and advocacy in Georgia. So we came together as a result of this really desperate need in Georgia in 2014 to talk about ways to better prepare library media specialists for their work and for their roles. Georgia District media coordinators, teacher preparation professors, building level library media specialists, representatives from the Georgia Library Media Association came together and set about developing a type of tool that would both advocate and provide means for evaluation of the media specialists. This newly formed group of people, the Georgia School Library Media Consortium, set about developing an advocacy/evaluation system that could bring uniformity across the state by defining the role that the librarian plays in the schoolhouse and beyond. And as Kim mentioned to you already, this instrument called the School Librarian Evaluation Instrument, or SLEI, was built using Gwinnett County, Georgia's document as a base, and also the 2007 AASL standards, the 2010 standards for initial preparation of school librarians, and the ISTE standards for coaches. And we really took care and went back and revised to make sure that we included future ready librarian language throughout this document, throughout this system. Now, many librarians in Georgia are using this tool right now as an advocacy piece to launch conversations with administrators. And that alone is a powerful step in bringing awareness and understanding to the essential contributions the professional librarian makes toward learning. And in some instances, the media specialist, at least in Georgia, is given duties that aren't necessarily part of the professional role. So sharing these SLEI standards can possibly lead to stronger supportive programs with more time for the school librarian to collaborate and administer the program and actually teach. But the system goes a step further and provides forms, spreadsheets, self-evaluation guides, time frames, and even assessments to yield a fully functioning evaluation process. And this entire system is applicable nationwide since it's built on national standards. So enough on the thoughts. Now, Holly Frilot, the fabulous, is going to share with you in detail what this system really looks like on the ground as it's being fully implemented this year in Cobb County, Georgia. And before she starts, I just have to say, Holly has been the force that's really seen this process through to completion. Her implementation is proven to be extremely successful in one of the largest counties in our state. So I think you'll really enjoy hearing this boots on the ground kind of report that Holly's going to share with you. Okay, Holly?
Thanks, Phyllis. Phyllis is I'm just honored, and I just love working with Dr. Phil Snipes, and I can see the attendees here in the audience probably do too. So thank you, Phyllis, and really and truly it has been wonderful to be able to work with her, as you know, she's been with these kind of 10 standards from the very beginning and kind of through this implementation process. So I'm a supervisor for library media in Cobb County. I do have a background in Gwinnett as well. Library media is my heart. It is what I love. And I really fought to use this tool in our county Not because I just love going through all of the things that you have to do with HR to implement something like this, but because I believed in it as an advocacy tool for those good conversations. So just a little bit about our background and how we've used it. So we did a pilot with 6 schools last year. I got principals on board, media specialists on board, and they were fantastic. They gave me so much feedback that I needed to know in order to make this a smooth rollout this school year. So we're in the middle of our first year of rollout for all 114 schools. It's about 120 something library media specialists and their evaluators. So that's where we are right now. We're kind of in the mid-cycle here, first day of February. So reminders are going out next week, but that's kind of where we are. So I'm going to talk about, there's like different angles to kind of talk about, but this 10 standards themselves, there's a couple of different ways to access them. Can everybody see my screen? Did it just change to 10 standards?
Yes, it did.
Okay, good. All right, so on the GLMA webpage, and I'll show that in just a second, there's all different ways to kind of access the 10 standards, but the 10 standards are there because of the 10 standards that are there in our TEKS and LEAKS formats in Georgia, how teachers are evaluated and how leaders are evaluated. So we use that as our model, and then we wrapped kind of library media around that. So it was smart for us to do it this way when we think about administrators and the conversations that we're having, because we gave them a framework that they were already familiar with. These 10 standards are an easy access point for them, because we know library media specialists, it's so hard to articulate what we do and how hard we work and how much we impact students. And what I really wanted are those conversation points with a principal or an assistant principal, whoever your evaluator might be, those access points. So those are the 10 standards. Instructional partnership listed as the very first one on purpose, because I really feel like that is the thrust of this tool and the way that school library has changed, you know, in the past 10 years or however many years we want to say. This is really the kind of thrust of the change of who we are and what we do. And so instructional partnership just kind of gets at that, how we're collaborating and what it is possible. So I was fortunate, our HR department in Cobb required all evaluators in our district to come to face-to-face training with me, which is just my preferred method of you know, talking to people. You can read their faces and you can answer their questions really easily. And it was just fantastic to get in front of the evaluators and really talk about what school library media programs can be if we let school library media specialists do what they can do. And so I really focused on this instructional partnership one. So then the rest of the 10 standards you'll see are probably kind of familiar: role of reading, info and tech literacy. Instructional leadership, I think, is one of the ones that's the biggest reach for the biggest amount of school library media specialists, and how they impact leadership or how they see their leadership role. So I have a few catchphrases that I use often, and one of them is this concept of how we as school library media specialists lead from the middle, and that we're not given titles of leadership in our school, but yet we're one of the few people in the school that impacts entire school culture, because we work with all of the faculty and we work with all of the students. And it's a pretty nuanced type of leadership. And so when I'm orchestrating professional learning, I'm thinking about, you know, how do I support library media specialists so that we kind of understand that nuanced type of leadership and how it kind of functions out of building relationships with the people in our building. And so anyway, I think that's one of the ones I hone in on because I think it's one of the most interesting and impactful of our standards. And some of them you'll see, for my Georgia folks here, you'll see things that are very familiar if you were ever evaluated under TEKS or LEAKS, but positive learning environment, I mean, that's straight out of TEKS. Professionalism and communication, also straight out of that teacher evaluation tool. So we did a lot of similarities and just put that school library media specialist spin on it. This is a GLMA page that has all of the information in case you're really into the nitty gritty. Down here in this purple box, I put all of the tools that we developed in our district in Cobb here for everybody to be able to take and use to support the SLEI. So if you're an administrator in the crowd, if you're, you know, looking at this from the HR perspective of like, what does this look like over the course of the year? All of those tools are there, including the formative assessment, the summative assessment, all that stuff is there. If you're a school library media specialist in the audience and you are just kind of like wanting to look at this and maybe evaluate yourself, and then maybe get some folks in your district on board, this green box here is kind of for you. You can come here and grab those tools. And I think just looking at the 10 standards and kind of thinking about your practice is a great way to just kind of get started. So for us in our district, that self-assessment piece is a required piece. At the beginning of the school year, the school library media specialists sit down with the 10 standards and they look at them and they evaluate themselves on a scale of 1 to 4, which is how our teachers and leaders are also evaluated. And so I think that assessment is a good way to go. And if you look at that assessment and you think, you know, I can't do this because I'm also tasked with managing textbooks and I'm tasked with, I have a media specialist who I was visiting one day and I learned that she was also in charge of dress code violations. And you know, I don't envy what principals have to do with staffing, but at the same time, it's like we have to educate them on what's possible for school library media specialists to do if she's not tasked with all of these other things. So I think when you look at the assessment tool and you think those things, I think they're good to note as conversation pieces if you do get that opportunity to talk with your evaluator, because you can say, hey, here's what I think I'm rocking, here's what I think I need to do better on, and here's how I'm going to do it, and here's what I would like to be able to do better on, but I feel like my time is spent here instead. And so I think there's some Cobb folks in the audience, so maybe they can chime in at a certain point too. I think the way we set up the 10 standards and the 3 conferences throughout the year, I think it's going to increase communication and an understanding between a principal and a library media specialist about who we are and what we do and how we impact students, and not only achievement, but also that engagement piece. I mean, I could also talk learning commons all day long and talk about how we're transforming our spaces and our practices and what that really means for the student engagement piece. Students are engaged and they want to come to school, they attend school more. We know that higher attendance means higher test scores, so that's one of the ways that I kind of equate what we're doing and how we impact student achievement. All right, I don't want to get too sidetracked. Phyllis, just feel free to rein me back in if you need to.
You are doing a great job. Perfect.
Okay, thanks. All right, so the tool itself looks like this, also linked off that same page. Sorry for, I wanted you to see kind of what the performance standards are and how they're set up. So we listed the performance standard, we wrote that out, we gave sample performance indicators and used that phrase in italics there. Examples may include, but are not limited to. Lots of conversations about checklists and how are administrators going to get into this piece, and everybody always wants checklists because it makes it easy, but I'm like, well, our jobs aren't easy, they're complicated, and nobody's job looks exactly the same. So I feel like a checklist is simply impossible to do. So you'll see in a little bit, I gave some additional kind of look-fors, what I call look-fors, to our evaluators, but we have the bullet points here. You know, this might be some of the things that might be happening, or if you're looking at this yourself and you're kind of assessing, I think it's a good way to kind of access that standard. And then you'll see the level 4, 3, 2, and 1, and kind of what that might look like. So you can see it's kind of a sliding scale there, and it's built on the same as our teacher and leader. So for, you know, instructional partnership, and then you'll see role of reading, and they all kind of follow that same format on through all of the 10 standards. So I think I'm going to get at the standards in a different way though. I'm going to go back here. All right, so what you see in front of you is kind of the basic shell of the presentation that I used with our evaluators, because I just thought it was a kind of an easy way to access. And this presentation, I think, is also up there on the GLMA webpage if you ever needed to access it. But what I did was I had, so if you have another tab open and you want to open those 10 standards, that actually would be a great thing to do on your computer. And so you can just kind of flip back and forth. And so I asked, and it ended up going pretty well. Phyllis was there for some of my trainings with the evaluators, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try this angle and we'll see how it goes. So they had the 10 standards in their hands. We did 3 standards at a time and then 4 for the last one. And I just had them read over it. I was like, look at it, look at the performance indicators, and then I'm going to give you some look fors for each of those standards. And there you see my comment about there's no checklist because every program is different. So if you're looking at the performance standard 1 with instructional partnership, and we talk about the different performance indicators, you know, where you're meeting with teachers and administrators on a regular basis to plan collaboratively. You're planning different approaches to the content. You're aligning to standards. You're talking about information literacy skills. I mean, we were just in 2 bullet points, you know, and that is a lot of work right there. The one I really highlighted here are the assessing student understanding and progress. And, you know, sometimes assessment can be a little bit of a prickly topic with library media specialists because we don't always necessarily assess in a kind of standard test-oriented way. You know, but like I'm a big fan of digital note taking. Those that know me know I'm going to talk about, I used to be a big advocate for EasyBib, and then they changed their model, and we're using Noodle tools in our district, and we use that for students 6-12, and even our upper level 4th and 5th graders are using it. But that digital note-taking piece, you know, like the note card and Noodle tools, for those of us who, like me, are old enough to remember, you know, using the regular note cards. I mean, this is just the digital component of that so that students just aren't copying and pasting a bunch of stuff from databases into a Word doc. And so that note card in Noodle tools makes them paraphrase right there. Okay, copy and paste your information and now paraphrase. So an assessment might look like the library media specialist standing over the shoulder of kids, you know, or working with them at a table and saying, hey, show me that paraphrasing. And let's talk about why that is a good example of paraphrasing and why maybe we need to tweak some things so that we're dealing with that right then and not 3 weeks down the line, you know, when they've turned in the paper and we have to figure out how to address it at that point. So I give some examples of how you might, you know, as an evaluator, look at assessment. So what you see in front of you are some of those additional look for possibilities that I gave to evaluators. And then I think this is great for everybody to think about what it is, how you would see that standard, right? So we see the standard, we understand the standard, we get that it speaks to what we do. Hopefully y'all think that this speaks to what we do as library media specialists. And then I feel like there's 3 kind of entry points into seeing these standards. You're going to either observe it, you're going to like witness it when you're in the media center or the learning commons. My evaluator actually had an office in my media center, so she was seeing what I did all the time. And I think that's one of the great ways, you know, is like she saw what was happening all the time and never even had to worry about a observation because she could just do it when she was walking through. But then some of these things are more about conversation, like instructional partnership, for example. You know, when you're in those meetings together, you know, as a, you know, an evaluator, you might get a good idea of their instructional partnerships just by the conversations in those meetings. And then documentation. A lot of us keep collaboration logs, you know, our calendar, how many times we're working with a class, those types of things. So all of those kind of speak to that standard. What we were trying to get away from a little bit in Cobb was we had a tool that had been very effective for a long time, but it also had, you know, it was, you know, like all things, it's in need of a little bit of an update. And part of that package was a documentation review. And so a lot of times it would be, you know, like the media specialist would collect documentation like portfolio style and turn that over to the evaluator. And so I kind of pulled that out. That's not a part of this model, but rather the documentation, which we upload in the contributing professionals platform of our DOE platform where TEKS and leaks are. And we can talk about that later if you want to, but you know, use the documentation. We have like 10 suggested things that we use in Cobb, like, you know, things like a collaboration log, but just use that to support the standards and not necessarily just collect the documentation, but use it kind of in a way that you know that you're supporting a standard. Phyllis, how am I doing?
I think you're doing great. I'm really glad you described that observation, conversation, and documentation piece, because all 3 of those I think are ways of looking at gathering data that are equally valuable. So, great.
And I think, you know, if you're a school library media specialist and you're thinking about like, I seriously do not need one more thing to do in my day, you know, about like recording what you're doing while you're doing it. And I 100% get that. But I think if you can build systems into place that are not obtrusive, you know, not, you know, if you have a collaboration log, hopefully that's just the way you keep yourself organized with the teachers that you're working with and things like that. I think it's just kind of like being strategic about how you organize those kind of built-in systems so that it doesn't feel like an additional layer, an additional thing that you need to do. Let's see, I think Gian has a comment. Where are we in getting the state to adopt this instrument? Okay, we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to let Phyllis, so Phyllis, get ready for that one. But I wanted to talk just briefly about a few more standards. So for role of reading, I'm a big advocate of Book Talks K-12. Got to get those high schoolers in that media center. Get them to see you excited about books and kind of build that culture, that reading culture some way. We talk a lot about reading culture. We talk a lot about reading culture in our district and how we're supporting reading culture. And it's a little bit, I'm just going to leave that hanging out there, is a little bit of a pushback towards the emphasis on Lexiles. We know with things like reading inventory and you know, for those of you who are elementary focused, Lexiles can be quite the focus. And so we use Biblionasium in our district. Biblionasium, which is kind of a crazy name, but it's kind of like the Goodreads for school, or Goodreads for kids, I should say. And it integrates with Destiny. So if you're a Destiny district, that's a great tool to look at. Because it supports reading culture, right? It's kids talking about books, kids interacting with books, they can keep their bookshelf, they can recommend books to each other. And I think this role of reading, I think looking at how you support reading culture in your school and how you can, you know, kind of continually adapt to providing for the needs that the kids have in your school. All right, let's see. Oh, there's one of my catchphrases. In information and technology literacy, the way that I explain to evaluators kind of what we do, because I'm trying not to use 21st century skills as much as possible, because it just kind of seems silly at this point in 2018 to use a phrase like 21st century skills. But and so I'm trying to use language more like future ready, and I'm trying to think about, you know, like what is it that evaluators know. And I think I even made that comment of like, you know, not really saying 21st century skills anymore. And I did have an evaluator ask me, he's like, well, what are 21st century skills? And so in thinking about the entry point for some of the evaluators who are in charge of evaluating us, you know, I was trying to figure out ways to help them understand. So like, you know, a lot of people say, oh, kids know technology, they know everything, they can do all kinds of stuff on their phone that I don't know how to do. And that's true. But to me, that means they're tech savvy. It does not necessarily mean that they're tech literate. So that's our job. That's what we do. That's how we help teachers help kids, not only with content and standards, but we're also building in a lot of those digital literacy skills that they just don't get access to otherwise. So what we want them to be able to do is understand how to use the web to really research. What are paid databases and why should we use them? And how can I effectively research and use these digital tools for knowledge and power and creation and creativity, and not just, you know, zip around and, you know, do Instagram or whatever on their phone. So I kind of think about it as like a scale of moving kids from tech savvy to tech literate. And a lot of times I see some head nods. They're like, okay, I get it. Yeah, there's a lot that happens out there on the web that we don't know about, and it's not just being able to use their phones well. So anyway. Let's see. Instructional leadership, I talked about that one probably already. Effective practices for research, so that's where we get at a little bit more, kind of building 3 and 5, standards 3 and 5 kind of go together to me. This is where I talk about inquiry work, because it gives me the opportunity when I'm talking with an administrator to talk about, okay, how are we kind of building in, everybody's excited about STEM, but a lot of people can't really truly define it. And I talk about, you know, I'm like, we're the E, y'all, you know, we're the E, we're the engineering cycle. We're the ones that can push kids to like think about things. Oh, we need to change it, we need to tweak it, and then do better. That can be research, that could be building something in a makerspace. But that inquiry work is really, really hard, and it's really messy. And a lot of teachers are really uncomfortable in that realm. So to me, the library media specialist is that support, right? We can help teachers kind of bridge into that inquiry, kind of area where kids are asking the questions and we're not giving them their topics, but we're kind of building that capacity for them to do that inquiry work. So I'm like, that's messy and that's hard. And so, but there's some look for it. You can look and you can see that work happening, and to kind of encourage teachers to be able to go into that space. We have some great social studies people in our district and leadership, and they're big into inquiry model. And I thought they did a great job because they were coaching their social studies teachers, and they said, okay, we're looking for like 15, 20, even maybe 25% of your work to be inquiry work, which I felt like just took the pressure off of everybody. Because I don't know if y'all know anything about social studies teachers, especially high school ones. They tend to be a little bit, structured. I can say that. I'm married to one. But I think, kind of like breaking that down and saying, okay, just a little bit of time we want kids to spend in this space, I think is a good thing. All right, number 6 is where you get credit for all that stuff you do behind the scenes. This is your big strategic plan. This is managing your budget. This is training everybody in your space. And I put there that, this is a lot of conversation in those conferences, and we'll talk about the structure in a second. And then documentation, you can turn in reports and things like that. Positive learning environment is about your climate. It's about maximizing what you have. It's not, having pretty stuff. It's about maximizing what you have and having an inviting climate and making sure that all students have access. Collection development, number 8, that's another one. I was talking about this with somebody today because somebody was like, oh, I met a media specialist who was in charge of both the middle school and the high school. And she was like, just talking about, she was like, just the collection development time alone and trying to buy and weed for essentially two schools was just so much time. And, so I was like, I totally get that because you have to develop it. Anyway, so number 8 is all about collection development. And then number 9 and 10 are professionalism and communication. So these are, kind of general ones, and you see there what those are. And so anyway, one of my notes here was like, this is what's possible, fully staffed program, typically with a full-time para or clerk to manage the space. And so I just needed to give administrators that kind of, access point of, if they're tasked with a whole bunch of things that you don't see reflected in these 10 standards, that's going to alter the way that they can impact the student achievement and the student engagement in your school. Okay, so we're going to skip through that for a second. So I wanted to show you just kind of how we set that up and how this looks over the course of the year for us. And then we'll get to some questions that y'all might have. So for us, we complete a self-assessment and goals. If you're in the state of Georgia, I'm pretty sure everybody had to do that goals component. We have 3 conferences throughout the year. Evaluators are required to do 1 30-minute teaching observation. And then if you are 3 years or under, you have 2 10-minute, what we call walkthroughs, because we were just using the same language. Those are really conversations for new library media specialists. And then there's a formative conference after that evaluation, and then there's a summative conference at the very end of the year. So that's kind of what it looks like from a structure perspective. But it's a really great tool to look at and evaluate yourself. A lot of us use things like exemplary library media program, library media specialist of the year. We look at different types of standards to kind of assess our work. And I think this is another way to kind of look at what it is we're doing. All right, so that's just a graphic about those 3 conferences. And that's about contributing professionals. So if people have questions about, us using the DOE platform with contributing professionals, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Okay. All right. So Phyllis, what you want to jump in with, or do we have questions?
Kim, have you fielded questions that you want to throw out for us, or should we answer? I've seen a couple over in the chat area as we've been talking.
Sure. We have one question from Jeanne. She asks, and Phyllis, I want you to start this one, and then you can pass it to Holly whenever you want. Actually, there's 2 pieces. The first piece of her question is, where are we on getting the state to adopt this instrument? So let's just let you start that one, Phyllis.
Okay, I'm glad to do that. I think that you will be pleased to know that this information is going to be included in the next media newsletter that's coming out from the DOE. It's just a brief write-up about the system and a link to the Georgia Library Media Association page that has all of these examples posted that Holly's so beautifully walked us through tonight. So that is something that is very exciting to know that it is being recognized, and I dare say encouraged. But through some conversations I've had, I feel like we are encouraged to pursue this particular advocacy evaluation model. So there is no official adoption at this point, and it possibly would be premature to officially adopt this for the state at this point. I think that we really do need to, what Holly is doing is laying the groundwork for us to be able to see how it's going to work and what we need to continue to work on, how we need to roll this out in a very orderly fashion. So I think that it's fine at this point if there's not an official adoption. And I do think that we are, I guess I could use the word supported. We are supported in pursuing this as our means of evaluation if a district so decides to do it. And as far as the partnership, there's also conversations going on. I'll mention that Beth Miller, past president of GLMA, is having with some DOE personnel. She's been in conversation with a professional development specialist at the DOE. So there are some conversations taking place, and I think that is absolutely excellent. We're seeing such a positive thing happen with what Holly's doing and what Gwinnett has done with a very similar program instrument. I know that as far as RESAs being a possibility for how this information can roll out, I know that we have Bunny Harris online with us tonight from Chat Flint, so I'm excited to see her in the numbers tonight. That is a possibility. I have gone in and I've pulled out every single RESA phone number and contact in the state of Georgia, because that might be a possibility where we could have this presented through those RESAs, which are such powerful ways to collaborate and communicate for media specialists in the state of Georgia. So Holly, anything you'd like to add to those comments?
And I think, like I just really fundamentally believe in this tool after, all this time with it and being able to examine it and being able to see how it's being used and being able to get reactions from people. Almost every evaluator has really enjoyed, especially the content of it. It's a little bit challenging right now for us with using the Contributing Professionals platform, because unlike TEKS, our things live in two different environments. Like the tools are one place and then we upload them. But from a content perspective, almost every principal I have talked to has looked at me and they shake their heads and they're like, this is just so much better because it actually talks about what either my library media specialist does or what I want my library media specialist to do. And I'm like, all right, that's enough for me to continue to champion this work. So, I mean, I'm happy to, Skype in if we're working with RESAs or we're working with, GLMA districts or something like that to kind of, talk about our experience. I even did a training for administrators in another county in Georgia. I'm like, how do I get myself roped into these things? But that's okay. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. And it's a good advocacy piece for who we are and what we do.
I think your time may be taxed a lot.
And if I could jump in quickly, if anybody would like to actually speak, just raise your hand and I'll give you audio. But let me ask the other piece of Jeanne's question. She asks, how can admins get training on how to use the SLEI tool? So Holly, why don't you start on that one?
That's a good question. I feel, I feel like they need someone to walk them through that. So I think we could develop some online training, because like really what I have fundamentally is like my presentation I use as kind of backup for the 4 administrators that were unable to come. And really, honestly, I had a phone conversation with them. So haven't really thought about scale and how we kind of like replicate that work. So I got to think about that.
Okay.
Phyllis, you want to jump in on that one? Do you have any ideas? I mean, maybe we could record something. Maybe that's what we do. Maybe we record, you know, Phyllis and I kind of walking through what this is and what it could look like in different districts in Georgia and outside of Georgia. Maybe that's a good way to go about it. Maybe it's like a, you know, not talk quite as much. Maybe we can make it a 30-minute webinar.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more. We've got several questions. Some of them are more like the nuts and bolts of being a school librarian. But first I'm going to skip over and ask the one from Heather because it involves the SLEI instrument. She says, I am in Virginia in a Catholic school district. We are working now to revise our librarian job description and develop or suggest a new evaluation tool for librarians. And they are currently assessed as teachers. She asks, may we use your tool as a resource for developing our own evaluation tool? Let's start with you, Phyllis.
Yes. Exclamation point. Absolutely. We that was kind of a goal, was to make this something that would be useful and applicable not just in Georgia, but across the whole nation and even beyond. Since it's based on national standards, we really feel like this would be something that could be beneficial to others. And I think Holly, having blazed the trail and those in Gwinnett who have also been through a similar system, I think that everybody would be more than willing to see this take place in all kinds of locations across the country, just because it's a great tool, as Holly said. Do you agree with that, Holly?
Absolutely. And, you know, Heather, feel free to shoot me an email anytime. And if you have to shoot me a follow-up email, remind me to answer your email. That's totally fine. But yeah, I'm happy to help. I was very fortunate to work with an HR department in my district that was just super excited about this tool, because they were like, this, you know, we feel like it needs a change. We think what you're doing is great. And they kind of walked me through a lot of that HR component that's certainly not my strong suit. And so I'm happy to answer questions that you might have along the way, because I was supported by a great team of people too, including the wonderful Dr. Phyllis Snipes.
All right. Carol asks a question about Lexile. She says, my district is strongly focused on Lexile. Sometimes students won't check out books simply because those they can't find anything interesting within their Lexile range. This is where I can really help them find something that they will enjoy. Just offering usually results in at least one more book checked out. I guess that wasn't a question. So her question was, can you offer suggestions to increase ebook use?
Ooh, ebook use is a tough one. I was talking with some folks today and they were like, what's your percentage of ebook use versus print use across your district? And I was like, 5% to 95%. It's just not a medium that kids have really jumped on board with. So I think if, you know, in advertising that they're there is one of the biggest things. So I think like actual physical displays about the ebooks that you have are a great way to do it. Lots of people do this, you know, where it's like, you know, you might do a display on a bulletin board or do on a wall. If you have QR codes that go directly to those ebooks, even better. I think, who was it? I forget. There's one of the public, Rourke maybe. Somebody does where they have those QR codes and you can just go straight to those books, which is kind of a nice, because one of the problems I feel like with ebooks is access. Access gets a little complicated. So I think if you're trying to increase ebook usage, the physical kind of displays in your media center, in your learning commons throughout your school, that's a great way to make kids know that they're there and available.
Excellent. You know, I think there are studies that indicate that ebooks are just not taking off the way that everybody thought that they would. Mm-hmm. I think that as far as textbook use, the ebooks are really a lifesaver, and those are really being used. but I'm just not hearing that there's a lot of use for fiction and reading for pleasure, especially at the lower levels. I think there's still some use, but it just hasn't been to the degree that was anticipated, is my understanding.
And I think access is real easy. You know, I was talking about that we have a good partnership with the public library in our district, and we were talking about that, and I was like, you know, so much print use happens because the Learning Commons and Media Center is right there for kids. It's really easy for them to go in there and get a book and just have it with them. And so I think that's one of the things too, is like those print books are just so much easier, and then there's that tactile experience that they have. So so I think, Carol, yeah, my suggestion is you're like, already do that. It's, you know, I mean, and it's a hard thing. I'm working on that too. How do we get more ebook usage, and why do we want it, and what did the kids want in ebook format versus what they want in print format?
Excellent. Paul asks a SLEI question. He says, my evaluator who uses this tool is still trying to evaluate me as if I'm a classroom teacher. Any advice? Holly, why don't you start with that one?
Hi, Paul. I know Paul. Yeah, that's a tough one. So sometimes we feel like it negates everything else that we do. Like we do so much more. I mean, we teach. That's and that's probably like one of the hardest things I think for people in general to do if you're doing it right. And so a lot of times they just want to see that teaching. They want to see what you're doing with that, and they don't take into account the different entry points that you have. Like you might have kids in front of you that you've never met before. You might have kids that you've worked with all year long, and you just don't have that same kind of those same access points that teachers do. So I'm guessing that your evaluator just wants to do the teaching part and then just move on. I don't know. Yep, there's Paul. I know. I'm like, oh, Paul, now I just want to ask you a bunch of questions. So yeah, I think maybe looking at some of the different standards and see if you can engage in a conversation that way, you know, about the role of reading. I mean, I know Paul's doing great things over there. He's super into technology and working in the makerspace realm. And so, you know, it's a shame that I guess your evaluator probably just wants to focus on those teaching components. But I think, you know, tooting your own horn as much as you can, and going at those standards that you're really proud of with the work that you do, and trying to engage in a conversation about that.
I think also that it may be possible to get fellow teachers on board with recognizing the kinds of things that you're doing way beyond teaching, and let those be advocates for you as well. That it's a tough place to be, because sometimes when administrators get their mind made up, it's like very difficult to change their minds. But sometimes the work that you do with other teachers can be a testimony to what the other kinds of things that you're doing.
I was lucky that I had a group of media leaders that we looked at this tool from their perspective before we put it into place. And so we spent a lot of time talking about these 10 standards before they were going to be evaluated by them. And they were good in giving me good feedback. And then sometimes we would go in these kind of circular conversations, and I'd say, you know, this tool is only going to be as good as the person whose hands it's in. You know, your evaluator might be in it for you, and they might be looking to check a box. You know, so sometimes it's a matter of like just keeping track of what you're doing, knowing you're doing the right thing, evaluating yourself, and making sure you're, you know, kind of keeping track of that thing when you get the positive feedback from the teachers and the students, and, you know, kind of keeping track, and then looking for mentorship in other arenas. You know, look into Twitter, look into your mentors, that type of stuff, because sometimes you're not going to get that feedback that you want from your evaluator because they're busy, or they're, you know, there's so many reasons. But yeah, I think kind of keeping track of what you're doing and evaluating yourself, and there's some piece that comes along with that, and seeking out mentors in other arenas.
I have a question. I know that that this SLEI instrument work has it seems like it's come out of some Atlanta area suburban districts like Gwinnett, and Cobb is really taking off with it. And I'm just kind of curious, projecting forward 5 or 10 years, what kinds of challenges do you see other districts, like the non-suburban, the 25% that are rural in Georgia or more? It's, you know, some large number are not near Metro Atlanta. What kind of challenges do you think those kinds of districts, maybe districts with lower resources, maybe they have more technology challenges, maybe that, you know, in rural districts, often everybody that works in the school building has to wear many more hats. There's less ability to specialize sometimes because you have to fulfill so many different roles. What kind of challenges do you all anticipate for non-suburban Atlanta districts with the SLEI? Phyllis, you want to take a stab first?
Sure. The first thought that comes to mind is this right now, this is not officially adopted and mandated, so it is negotiable. It's adaptable. So districts that want to use this framework, that's great. And if they need to start kind of small, so to speak, then I think I can see this being used in that fashion. So that's one of the beauties of this is that you can adjust as you need to in districts right now. And you're right, those smaller districts, there would be some challenges. Part of it would be funding, and part of it would be, as we mentioned earlier, so many media specialists locked into doing things that are really not part of their professional duties. Hopefully, over time, with seeing what the power that's in this tool, if allowed to live up to what it's indicating the media specialist should be able to do, hopefully that would change over time. And even in those smaller districts, they would be more supported to do these kinds of professional things that they can to impact student achievement. Holly, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so too. I think there's a couple of different ways to kind of look at it and say, okay, I know that really 40% of my time. So sometimes when I'm talking with media specialists who are frustrated, you know, they're like, oh, I get tasked with all these things. And I was like, okay, let's see, can we put some numbers on it? What do you think? Is it 40% of your time that you get to be a library media specialist? Is it 72% of your time? You know, where do you think that split lies? Because it's such an emotional thing. We're so invested, most of us, in kind of what we're doing. And so, you know, to me, it's like, okay, if you think, okay, 50% of the time I get to be a library media specialist. So, you know, then we look at maybe a tool like this and we think of what's my area of strength, and I'm going to play to that. What do my kids in my school really need? I'm going to focus on those standards. So you could do, you know, it might be that you could do something along those lines. I also think it's a way like you could start there and then build. And if you can get administrator or somebody that kind of buys into your work and what you're doing and then kind of build from there. I'm gonna give a shout out to Floyd County. Floyd County came to visit some of our schools today and we had some excellent conversations with them, and they're hiring 6 library media specialists this year, you know, so they're putting their media specialists back in and they see that role and how important it can be in how we're impacting students. So, you know, coming at that from an advocacy piece as well, I think it's a good way to show what's possible, you know, what's possible as you grow your program, if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, thank you. We have about 1 minute left. We've got one more question from Dennis. He says, I know that you said that expectations should be lowered for part-time library media specialists. Have you thought about developing recommendations based on the size of school and number of hours worked for each school?
I had not thought of that. Phyllis, you?
Well, yes, I have kind of considered that kind of thing. And I think that sort of step would come as we move forward with this. Right now, I think it's kind of premature, but I think that that's an excellent step to take. I think the size of the school and the number of hours worked would really impact the ability to complete these 10 standards effectively. So I think that that's something we certainly need to consider, along with continually updating as we see the need to do so.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for coming, everybody, tonight. And if you want to follow up with Dr. Snipes or Ms. Frilot, you see their emails up here on this final slide. Also, that information is located on our information page at tinyurl.com/smtwebinar1. Feel free to email me if you need a certificate of attendance, and we really appreciate your coming tonight.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Yes, thanks for showing up. Great conversation, yes. Special thanks to Kim Hewitt for organizing all.
For
Dr.
organizing.
Thank you.
The SMT division appreciates y'all being our guinea pig.
Well, you certainly just absolutely blew everybody away, Kim, with this whole effort.
Shucks, Phyllis, shucks.
Y'all are funny. I'm gonna come over to West Georgia and hang out with y'all.
Please.